Remember that it was super easy to create copyrights, that all we needed to do is create something original that's fixed in a tangible way, and then poof, at that second, you have your copyrights. Now, the important thing that I want y'all to take in is that you don't need to file any paperwork with the government to get your copyrights. You get them automatically. The second that you create a work, you own those rights. And so you have the right from that moment forward to decide what happens with that work. You make all the decisions about it. That's your right. If things have to be original and fixed in a tangible way, then if we flip that, of course, there's no copyright for anything that's unoriginal or anything that you haven't recorded in some way. Other things that sometimes people confuse with copyright law, they'll say like, so-and-so stole my song. And then they'll point to their song and they'll point to the other person's song and they'll say, see, but what they're really pointing to is the idea behind the song, like the theme of the song, not the words themselves, not the melody itself, just the idea of the song. But that's not protectable. There's nothing that they can do about that. So copyright's about the expression of ideas, not the protection of ideas. Each person expresses things differently, and that's all protectable. You probably had the experience with song titles that you're looking for a song that you want to listen to on your favorite streaming site. You type in the title and a bunch of different songs come up. That's because song titles aren't protectable under copyright law. So you can have a bunch of songs with the same title and that's okay. The US government doesn't hold copyrights on its own. So all of the works that people that work for the government create go into the public domain almost immediately. So if you've ever attended like American high school and had to do a history project and you were looking for photos or videos, you probably found a lot of military material that was public domain and free for you to use. And that's why. With government works, they immediately go into the public domain. And for all other works, when the copyright expires, it goes into the public domain. And that just means that at that point, the copyright has expired, and then anybody can use that work. They don't have to ask for permission. They don't have to pay for it. It's just free for anybody to use that material. When you create a work, you're the owner, and that you can't verbally transfer works. Just because somebody paid you a little bit of money, that doesn't transfer copyrights in the works. You have to have something. Remember, it was 2 parts for the exam. Has to be a written agreement, but it also has to be signed. And that signature is super important because that indicates that the person agreed to the terms. If you just have a contract that's not signed, nobody can prove, especially after they're dead, that they meant to agree to it. When you hear a recorded song, there's a composition that's protected by copyrights, and that includes lyrics and melody and everything that makes that song a song. Kind of think of that as sheet music, like the skeleton of the song. And then you have the sound recording, and every sound recording made gets its own copyright. The sound recording is kind of your expression of the composition, but they each get their own protection. And that's very important to take in. What do you get when you have something original and fixed in a tangible way? This is the actual copyright law. If you do any work in the music industry, a lot of the contract offers that you receive are going to be ones that recite these. So it'll say, I state my name, authorize you to reproduce, distribute, publicly perform, make derivative works of, and publicly display the following work. And so if you understand these are the exclusive rights, and that when somebody has that in a contract, that's really, really broad what they're asking for. You'll have a better idea of what you're getting yourself into. Now I'm going to go through and explain what they each mean. And I put them in the order of kind of importance. Well, first I get rid of the one we don't care about, and then I go in the order of importance. So first of all, the thing to understand that this is the copyright law. Anything that you create under copyright law, whether it's a painting or a photograph or music, these are the 6 exclusive rights that you get. So some are more important to some creators than others. So if I'm a painter, I probably aren't really very concerned about my public performance of the composition or my public performance of the sound recording, because those don't mean anything to me. I don't have compositions, I don't have sound recordings. But what might be super important to me is my right of public display. Where can you put my work? When can you put my work? That's going to be something that I'm really going to care a lot about if I'm an artist. But as a musician, this one is one that we don't really care too much about. The ones we really start caring about are things like who can take our music and get it out there in copies, whether it's a digital copy or vinyl or CDs or whatever it's going to be. This is your right. So you get to decide, is someone authorized to manufacture copies of your music? Is somebody authorized to take a digital copy of it and distribute it to the world? That's your right. And if somebody does that, like let's say you've been working really hard, you've got a date 3 months in the future that you're going to release your project, and you've been promoting and doing shows and really gearing towards this drop date for your first single, and somebody gets a copy and just drops it and now it's out there. That can be really harmful for a beginning artist that doesn't really have the resources to just roll with it. So your right of reproduction, you do have some recourse under the law if somebody does something like that. Distribution is very closely connected to reproduction. This is when the works are going out to the public. So reproduction, you're making copies, and distribution, you're distributing the copies. Let's say that you start a record label and you want to make a lot of vinyl albums for your clients because you know that your audience loves vinyl and it just goes with your style of music, and that would be great, but it's a little pricey. So you might contact a company and say, I'm willing to exclusively make you in charge of all reproduction of my projects for my record label if you will give me a discount. And they'll say, well, okay, yeah, as long as we're exclusively in charge of all reproduction for your company, we'll give you a deep discount. And that would be great. And let's say that you decide to go with a big distribution company to get your music into all the digital streaming sites and also get that vinyl into record stores. They might say, if you go with us for all of your projects, we'll give you a better deal than we would if you were just doing project by project. So they would become your exclusive distributor, and that would be that exclusive distribution you'd be only giving to them. Now, let's say that the person that's making the vinyl, they decide, these are really good. We're going to take 100 of them and we're going to ship them out to a festival because I think they'll do really well there, and we'll just give the money right to the rights owner. Well, they can't do that. They don't have the right of distribution. They can only make the copies. And if they distribute them, it violates their agreement with you, but it also kind of puts you in a position where you have to defend yourself with the person you have an agreement for distribution with. Coming out of those rights, when people are recording your music and making their versions of it, a cover is when the music pretty much, it's meant to be a tribute to the original creators, and you're trying to sort of recreate that original version of it. So it's typically the same key signature, same tempo, same instrumentation. The vocalist is usually trying to follow the same vocalizations that the original artist did. That's a cover. An arrangement is where you have to change the song because you don't have that instrumentation, or you don't play that style of music, but you still like the song. So you need to make some slight changes to make it work. That's okay. You can take someone's song, and when you make your sound recording of it, you can make adjustments to the song to fit how you do your music, to suit how your sound is and your instrumentation. The Copyright Act, this thing in quotes here, to conform it to the style or manner of interpretation of the performance. That's from the Copyright Act. That says that's okay. The line in the sand, though, is you can't change up the original song so much that it starts sounding like something different. If you've changed the verse, the melody in the verse, or the words in the verse, or you've changed the structure of the song, you added in a lot of your content, then again, pulling from the copyright law, if you've changed the basic melody or the fundamental character of the work, it can be really problematic, because if you make drastic changes, it's no longer a cover or an arrangement. Now it crosses the line into being another one of our exclusive rights, and that's the right to make derivative works. So our fourth exclusive right is the right to make derivative works. You can have derivative work of a composition, and you can have a derivative work of a sound recording. And there's two different ways that you might get there. One is the line that I just talked about. If you cross it and you've gotten super creative, and you've gotten so creative that you've gotten really far away from the original melody and it's not quite recognizable anymore, or you change the lyrics so much that it really changes the song, that would become a derivative work. Or if you only took part of someone else's music or part of their lyrics and put them into your song and then wrote a whole song around that, that's a derivative work too. You got, sampling is a derivative work of the composition and the sound recording, because you're taking that whole chunk out and using it in your work. Interpolation is where you're not using the sound recording, but you're taking a chunk of someone's composition from their song and then you're re-recording it, either the way they did or changing the sound a bit to reflect your style more. Medleys, usually that's not a sound recording either, that's the composition. It's a derivative work of chunks of different compositions that are blended together to make one. Typically you see that like at the end of musicals. And then mashups, those are derivative works of the composition and the sound recording in some cases. And that would be like when you have a vertical mashup, where a lot of times DJs will do this. They'll just take little chunks of lots of different songs to create a new texture and a new song, which when done well is really amazing. In the Copyright Act, there are two different public performance rights, one for the composition and one for the sound recording, and they're very different in their scope. But what's the same is the definition of public performance, and that's where the performance is to the public and is outside of your circle of family and friends. If you kind of think about, like, if I'm playing a song to just my friends in my apartment, or at a little barbecue that's just in my backyard, that's private, that's not public. But if I am at a park and I've got a huge stack of speakers and I'm blasting it out and you can hear it 2 miles away, that's a public performance. The exclusive right of public performance that connects to the composition of this one's been around for a really, really long time, like well over 100 years. And this goes back to, public performance of literally like sheet music. When people would play the piano and do sheet music, that would be a public performance when it was done in public. As technology evolved, all the new technologies that were available to broadcast the compositions to the public, those became public performances. So that today, just about anything you can think of, like any place you are where music is being broadcast to the public, from on hold music to when you're given headphones on an airplane, terrestrial radio, television shows, just about everything you can think of is a public performance of the composition. The one little exception is that when you hear something performed in a movie theater, that's not a public performance, but that's more of an exception that had to do with lobbying and some mistakes that some people made way back, I think in the 20s. But this is really super broad. Almost anytime you're hearing music when you're out and about, it's a public performance of the composition. The public performance of the sound recording is very narrowly defined. This didn't even exist until 1995 when the Copyright Act was adjusted and they created this new exclusive right. There used to only be 5 and now there's 6. Public performance of the composition, very, very broad. The sound recording one is limited to digital streaming and satellite radio, and that's it. So when you hear a song on regular radio, that's not a public performance of the sound recording. When a song comes up on a TV show, not a public performance. Songs being played in a club, not a public performance of the sound recording. So it's very, very narrow to just streaming and satellite radio. Those are our 6 exclusive rights. I know it's a little dull, but it's important to know what your rights are so that as you're working through the music industry and you're working with others, you have a better idea of what you're doing and what rights you have and what kind of control that you have over what other people are doing with your music. When you're collaborating, you're just about making the music, right? It's about being creative, and you add something, someone else has added something, it inspires you to add something else, and it's that creative process, and you lose track of time and you just get all immersed in the music. It's also important in the back of your mind to remember that you're creating copyrights when you're collaborating with other people. And remember how easy it is to create them. Original, fixed, poof, you've got rights. So when you're collaborating with other people, it's super important to understand how the law works because it's pretty counterintuitive to how musicians think. If you wrote a song, you've been working on it for a few months now, and it's like 90-95% finished, but there's just something about the verse going into the chorus that's just not right yet. It's missing something, and you just can't figure out what it is. So you're playing it for a friend, and they go, oh, well, what if you did? And they go over to the piano, and they do it. And that's exactly what it needed. The song is done now. Now, our gut would say, okay, that was great that they did that, and they should get something for it, but I did like 95% of it. So I'm willing to give them 5% because, I was really stuck there. So I'll give them 5%. But that's not how copyright law works. It presumes that anytime people are working together, that they all intend to be equal owners. And by equal owners, they all own 100% of the rights in the song. Not just their 5% that they created, but they own 100% of the song. And when you're dividing revenue, you divide it equally, not 5%, 95%, but each person gets 50% of the money. And a lot of people are like, wait, that's not fair. I did 95% of the work. But copyright law sees it as if you're collaborating, you meant to do this together. So it's a 50-50 share of the money. And the 100% control, sometimes people stumble over that. Like, well, how can you each control 100%? That doesn't work. Shouldn't it be 50% if there's 2 people? But think of it this way. If you co-own a car with somebody and you want to take the car on a trip, you're not going to take half the car. It's not going to work. You take the whole car, right? And you go driving off, and then you come back, and you decide where you're going to go. You decide how you're going to get there. It's like that. Each person controls the whole song. And so each person can issue licenses and permissions to other people to do things with the song. And they don't really have to ask permission of the other owner. They can just do it, but if they make money, they have to share it equally with the other owner. So this is a default under copyright law. It doesn't have to be this way, but this is the way it is if you don't have anything in writing. So if you think about all the collaborations that you've done with other people, you've performed on their recording projects, you've contributed to their songwriting, you're a producer and you've collaborated on other people's projects. I bet you didn't realize that you own and control 100% of the rights in those works. And I bet the people that you worked with have no clue as well. So this is a really important thing to know. It's fine to give away copyrights, but you want to do it on purpose, not by not understanding how this works. If you don't like the idea of sharing 100% of the rights with somebody else and splitting the revenue equally, not based upon how much they contributed, then the only way to get around it is a contract. You have to have something in writing that says you get 5% and I get 95% ownership, and makes it super clear how that's going to work. So you want to address 3 topics. You want to address who owns it, who gets money from it, and who gets to control it. And those are 3 separate topics that you want to put into the contract, because like if you wrote 95% of the song, you don't necessarily want that 5% owner to be able to go around and make deals without even asking you. So you could say, you don't have any rights to make deals. I have that 100%. And maybe you don't want them actually owning that 5%. You say, okay, I'm going to own it 100%, but I will give you 5% of the revenue. So you can do it that way, but you have to put it into a contract in order to make that work. Now, a big part of why we have contracts in the industry is because copyrights last a really, really, really long time. So if we're creating something like during your lifetime, anything you've created during your lifetime that has copyright, first, we have to wait until you die. And then the clock starts ticking, and 70 years from then is when your copyrights expire. Now, if you're collaborating with other people, then you just kind of wait till everybody dies, and the last person who dies, you add 70 years on to them. Easily, your copyrights could last over 100 years. If you think about it, like a collaboration you did 10 years ago, what if it takes off next week? How are you going to remember, like, what did we agree to 10 years ago? Or what if it's, let's say 75 years from now. So you're still alive, but you're really, really old. Again, it might be difficult to remember what the agreement was. So having something in writing, it clarifies who owns what, who controls what, and who gets what money. So there's no confusion about it. When you're having people collaborate with you, you can decide ahead of time, I don't want you to own any copyright. With a work made for hire, remember that that's about not owning copyright. It doesn't mean that you can't pay them money. It doesn't mean you can't take all control away from them, but it means they won't own any copyright. And so that's something that you would want to have people sign before they collaborate with you to make it really clear you're not going to own any copyright. So that's super important too. Now, if you do have someone sign a work made for hire form, then the duration of copyright is a little bit different. It's not based on anyone's lifetime anymore because you're no longer an author. There's not a person that's an author. It's owned by the person who had you fill out the form. So they go by, if the music was released or if the song was released, then it goes 95 years from that release date. Or if it wasn't released, then 120 years from when it was created. Sound recordings didn't have copyright protection at the federal level until the Copyright Act of 1976 created a new right saying that sound recordings were protected under federal copyright law. And they set the date of when it would start to February 14th, 1972. So from that date forward, if a sound recording is original and fixed in a tangible way, it has all of the rights we were talking about so far. But when they created this act, they said, we'll just leave everything from before February 14th, 1972, the way it was. So there were some states that had their own copyright laws to cover sound recordings, like New York and California, of course. And then other states just had just common law rights. There have been a couple of changes, but the most recent change to the Copyright Act says that for sound recordings that were created before February 14th, 1972, They will all go into the public domain February 15th, 2067. You're using a pseudonym that they use the work made for hire formula for copyright duration rather than the life of the author. And that kind of makes sense if you think about it, because you're not saying who the author is when you're using a pseudonym, so you can't track the author's life. When you've created copyrights, you have two broad choices. Either I'm going to keep my copyrights all to myself. This is a trend that's increasingly becoming more popular in the music industry, where songwriters, recording artists, they want to own all of their copyrights. There's a lot of value in owning your copyrights. Like if you have a few hit songs over your career, you could sell your catalog for millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to a publishing company or a music library. It has a lot of value having that ownership right. So if you are the owner and you own those copyrights, then you can issue exclusive licenses, which means you're giving one entity permission to do something and you can't give anybody else permission to do that, or non-exclusive licenses. So earlier I gave some examples of exclusive licenses when I was talking about having someone creating the vinyl albums for you. They're your exclusive, you would be issuing an exclusive license to them to have the right to do your reproduction. But typically when you are giving someone permission to use your song in a TV show, it's usually a non-exclusive license. You could also use that song in a trailer for a movie as well. You have the ability to choose what level of permission you're giving to somebody, which is really good as the owner. But then you have the other side where you can give away your ownership rights. If you already have your copyright and now you're giving them away to somebody else, you have the ability to get them back in the future. The exclusive right to public performance of the composition. So like I said, this one's super, super broad. And with this one, we have performance rights organizations that handle this right on behalf of songwriters and publishers. So it's their job to monitor what's being publicly performed for compositions, to assign value to those public performances if value hasn't been assigned by some other entity like the Copyright Act or the Copyright Royalty Board. And then they collect those royalties and they get them to the rights owner. Synchronization licensing. So this license is where you're giving somebody, usually non-exclusive, but it could be exclusive as well, permission to take your composition, not your sound recording, but your composition, and connect it with something moving on a screen. So it could be a TV show, it could be a movie, it could be a cartoon, it could be a video game, but it has to be something that it plays from one point to another connected to the visuals. So that's a synchronization license. We have mechanical licenses. Now, your book author and a lot of book authors will call it a compulsory mechanical license. And sometimes they abbreviate it down to compulsory license. But I want to clarify this because there are a couple of types of compulsory licenses. And I want you to be really clear when you communicate with people what you mean. Compulsory means you must do it. Mechanical license is the type of license. So a compulsory mechanical license is a license that you have to pay for. And that's where the compulsory comes in. So it's not, the license isn't called the compulsory license. The license is a mechanical license, but it is compulsory. This is when your composition, when there's copies being made of it to be released to the public. So whether it's a digital copy that is being made whenever someone streams it, or whether it's a copy on a CD or vinyl, there's a payment that has to be paid to the rights owner for every single copy that is made. So that's a mechanical license. The public performance of the sound recording, there's two different sides to it. On one side of it, for streams that are like radio, where you don't have a lot of choice on what the next song is going to be, there's another performance rights organization that handles the licensing, and this is Sound Exchange. For streams that are more radio, like Pandora or any of the streaming radio stations where you have limited control, you can say, "Oh, I don't like this song," and it'll stop playing. Or you can say, "I like this one, play more like this." You can do those things, but you don't have the ability to listen to the exact song that you want to listen to. So Sound Exchange is another performance rights organization that you sign up with. They monitor the public performances of the sound recordings and non-interactive streams. They collect your money, they put it in your account. Another license is a master use license. This is anytime somebody wants to use your exact sound recording, whether they want to use just a part of it as part of a sample, or whether they want to use the whole song in like a compilation album. That requires a master use license. Those are our music licenses. This is our entire vocabulary. We've got the mechanical licenses for the copies of the compositions. We've got the public performance of the composition that performance rights organizations handle on your behalf. Derivative works license, and synchronization, connecting the composition to something moving. On the sound recording side, we have the derivative works license. Again, we talked about those earlier. Public performance, it's for the digital audio transmission of sound recordings, like in streaming. And then the master use license, anytime someone's using your exact recording, whether it's part of it or the whole thing.